Racist man slaps mom with crying baby. Didn't realize she was flying to meet her CEO husband. The sound of a slap cut through the ambient noise of the crowded departure lounge like a thunderclap. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned. Phones lowered. In the sudden silence, a baby's wail escalated from distressed to terrified. The tall white man in the expensive suit stood over the seated Indian woman, his face contorted with rage, his right hand still raised. "I told you to shut that brat up," he snarled, seemingly oblivious to the collective gasp that had swept through gate 34. The young mother's cheek blazed red where his hand had connected, but her eyes, dark and steady, betrayed no fear as she cradled her screaming infant closer. "You have made a very serious mistake," she said, her accented voice quiet yet carrying in the shocked stillness. From 3 rows back, an airline employee was already rushing forward, hand to a radio. Near the priority boarding lane, a distinguished older man in a pilot's uniform was moving with surprising speed toward the confrontation, his face a mask of controlled fury. But it was the ping of an incoming text that drew the woman's attention briefly to her phone. She glanced at the message, then looked back at her attacker with an expression that had shifted from dignified restraint to something approaching pity. "A far more serious mistake than you realize," she added softly, as the terminal doors slid open behind her and a man in an impeccably tailored suit strode in, flanked by airline executives in corporate attire. The CEO of Transcontinental Airways, instantly recognizable from countless news features and company videos, scanned the gate area with laser focus until his eyes locked on the tableau before him. The color drained from the attacker's face as recognition dawned. "Ananya." The CEO called out, his voice carrying the unmistakable edge of controlled panic. "What happened? Are you and Leela all right?" The man who had delivered the slap took an instinctive step backward, his expression morphing from righteous anger to dawning horror as understanding crashed over him like a wave. His gaze darted from the CEO now striding purposefully toward them, to the security personnel materializing from multiple directions, to the woman still calmly soothing her child despite the angry mark blooming on her cheek. "I didn't," he began, then stopped, the enormity of what he had done finally penetrating his consciousness. He had just assaulted the wife of James Harrington, the most powerful man in commercial aviation, the man whose company operated half the planes in this very airport, including the one this man was undoubtedly booked on. The flight he would now certainly miss, along with whatever business had necessitated his pressed suit and monogrammed briefcase. And as the ring of security tightened around him, the man realized with sickening clarity that a missed flight would be the very least of his worries. Dr. Ananya Harrington adjusted the straps of her baby carrier with practiced precision, double-checking that 6-month-old Leela was securely nestled against her chest. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of their Beacon Hill brownstone, casting warm patterns across the polished hardwood floors. In the kitchen, their housekeeper Rosa was packing a carefully prepared diaper bag with all the essentials for air travel with an infant. Extra outfits, diapers, wipes, pacifiers, and enough formula to survive unexpected delays. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you, Dr. Harrington?" Rosa asked, her concern evident in her furrowed brow. "Flying alone with a baby is not easy, especially on such a long trip." "We'll be fine, Rosa," Ananya assured her with a warm smile. "James is sending a car to meet us at O'Hare, and the flight staff have been notified that we're traveling. Besides, Leela's quite the experienced traveler already." This was true. At just 6 months old, Leela had already accompanied her mother on 3 domestic flights. As the director of global health initiatives at Massachusetts General Hospital, Ananya occasionally needed to attend conferences even during her maternity leave. Today, however, was a different sort of journey. After 3 weeks apart due to his extended business negotiations in Chicago, James was finally wrapping up the largest acquisition in Transcontinental Airways history. Rather than wait for him to return to Boston, Ananya had decided to surprise him by bringing their daughter to Chicago for the weekend celebration. "I've packed her noise-canceling headphones and that elephant-teething toy she loves," Rosa continued, zipping the overstuffed bag. "And I put a change of clothes for you too, just in case. Babies have their way of making sure we don't stay clean for long." Ananya laughed. "You think of everything, Rosa, thank you." At 42, Dr. Ananya Harrington, née Patel, had built a formidable reputation in international medicine long before she'd met and married James Harrington 5 years earlier. With dual specialties in infectious disease and public health policy, she had led initiatives across 4 continents and advised government agencies on pandemic preparedness. When she'd first encountered James at a charity gala in London, where he was being honored for Transcontinental's refugee airlift program that she had helped coordinate medically, neither had expected the connection that would swiftly develop between them. Their marriage had raised eyebrows in some circles, not just for the cultural differences between the India-born physician and the white American airline CEO, but also because both were considered somewhat married to their demanding careers. The skeptics had been proven wrong over the subsequent years, as they balanced their professional responsibilities with a deeply committed partnership. Leela's arrival had only deepened their bond, adding a new dimension to their already rich lives. "The car service just texted they're 2 minutes away," Ananya noted, checking her phone. "Is everything by the door?" "All ready," Rosa confirmed, bringing the diaper bag to join the small suitcase already waiting in the foyer. "The stroller is folded in the hall closet. Do you want it?" Ananya considered for a moment. "No, I think just the carrier today. Navigating the airport is easier when I have both hands free." As the doorbell rang announcing the driver's arrival, Ananya did a final mental inventory. Tickets on her phone, ID in her purse, credit cards, baby supplies, comfort items for Leela. Everything was organized with the same meticulous attention she brought to complex medical operations. "We'll be back Sunday evening," she reminded Rosa. "But I'll text updates, and you have all the hotel information in case of emergency." "Have a wonderful trip," Rosa replied, gently touching Leela's downy head. "And give Mr. Harrington my best." The ride to Boston Logan International Airport was smooth, with minimal Friday morning traffic. Leela dozed contentedly against her mother's chest, lulled by the motion of the car and the soft Indian classical music Ananya played on her phone. The driver, an older Caribbean man named Morris, kept the temperature perfectly comfortable and drove with the care of someone transporting precious cargo. "First time flying with the little one?" he inquired, meeting Ananya's eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. "Fourth time, actually," Ananya replied, "though her first time to Chicago." "Ah, getting her started young. My grandson didn't fly until he was almost 10. Now he's afraid of it. Better to let them experience these things early, I always say." Ananya nodded in agreement. "That's our philosophy, too. We want her to be comfortable in different environments from the beginning." At the airport, Morris insisted on helping with her bags all the way to the check-in counter, waving away her attempt to add an extra tip. "Just taking care of my passengers properly, ma'am. You've got your hands full with that precious little one." The Transcontinental Airways premium check-in line was mercifully short. Though Ananya never leveraged her connection to the airline's CEO for special treatment. In fact, many employees wouldn't even know who she was by sight. She did appreciate the efficiency of their premium service on the occasions when she flew with her husband's airline. "Good morning," greeted the check-in agent, a woman in her 50s with a name tag reading Diane. "Checking in for Chicago today." "Yes, for myself and my infant," Ananya confirmed, presenting her ID and pulling up the digital tickets on her phone. Diane's fingers moved efficiently over her keyboard. "Dr. Harrington and—" "Leela Harrington, is that correct?" "Yes, that's right." If Diane made any connection between the Harrington name and her employer, she gave no indication. She processed the check-in professionally, assigned their seats, and tagged Ananya's suitcase. "We'll be boarding in approximately 1 hour at gate 34. Would you like an escort to help you through security with the baby?" "No, thank you. We should be fine." "Very well. Do you have any questions about traveling with an infant today?" "I think we're all set," Ananya smiled, adjusting Leela, who was beginning to stir against her chest. "We've done this a few times now." "Wonderful. Have a pleasant flight, Dr. Harrington." Security was relatively painless, despite the usual requirement to remove Leela from her carrier for the screening process. TSA had become more accommodating to parents traveling with infants in recent years, and the agent who assisted Ananya was both efficient and kind. "What a beautiful baby," the female agent commented as she helped Ananya navigate the screening area. How old? 6 months last week, Ananya replied, supporting Leela's head as she transferred her back into the carrier after they'd cleared security. Perfect age, the agent smiled. Old enough to have some neck control, young enough to not be crawling away from you yet. Just wait until they're toddlers. Security becomes a whole different challenge. With nearly 40 minutes remaining before boarding would begin, Ananya decided to find a quiet spot in the gate area to feed Leela, who was now fully awake and beginning to show signs of hunger. Gate 34 was already filling with passengers for the Chicago flight, primarily business travelers given the early Friday departure time. Ananya located a relatively secluded seat near the window, with an empty chair beside her for the diaper bag. As she settled in and prepared a bottle of formula, she observed her fellow passengers with the people-watching interest that had served her well in her public health work. The ability to read individuals and groups, their behaviors, their needs, their potential reactions, had proven valuable in everything from disaster response coordination to pandemic containment strategies. The gate area presented the usual airport tapestry: rushed business travelers on phones, families corralling children and luggage, solo adventurers with well-worn backpacks. 2 gate agents were setting up for boarding, arranging priority lane markers and checking equipment at their stations. Leela accepted the bottle eagerly, her dark eyes, so like Ananya's own, gazing up with complete trust as she drank. These quiet moments of connection amid busy settings had become precious to Ananya during her maternity leave. Despite her passion for her global health work, the past 6 months with Leela had revealed depths of joy she hadn't fully anticipated when she and James had decided to start a family in their 40s. As Leela finished her bottle, Ananya gently positioned her against her shoulder for burping, patting the baby's back with practiced ease. The terminal had grown considerably more crowded, with most seats now occupied and a steady stream of travelers still arriving for the flight. A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit entered the gate area, pulling a sleek leather carry-on and speaking intensely into a Bluetooth earpiece. Something about his demeanor caught Ananya's attention, not just the volume of his voice, which carried despite the bustle of the terminal, but the dismissive way he gestured for an elderly woman to move aside as he made his way toward the priority seating area. "No, that's completely unacceptable," he was saying to whoever was on the other end of his call. "The presentation is scheduled for noon, which means everything needs to be set up by 11 at the latest. I don't care what technical issues they're having, fix it." He scanned the gate area with evident dissatisfaction, clearly looking for a seat. His gaze passed over Ananya and the empty seat beside her, hesitated, then moved on, a brief but familiar moment of assessment and dismissal that Ananya had experienced countless times throughout her professional life. Leela chose that moment to emit a particularly loud burp, followed by a happy gurgle. The sound drew a smile from an older woman seated across from them, who gave Ananya a conspiratorial nod of grandmotherly approval. "Sounds like someone's feeling better," the woman commented. "She certainly is," Ananya agreed, shifting Leela back into a cradling position. "The pressure changes during takeoff and landing can be uncomfortable for babies, so a good burping beforehand helps." "You've clearly done this before," the woman observed. "I remember flying with my kids when they were little back in the 80s. Not nearly as many conveniences then, no special boarding, no changing tables in the lavatories. You young parents have it a bit easier these days." "In some ways," Ananya acknowledged, "though I think parenting comes with universal challenges regardless of the era." Their pleasant conversation was interrupted by an announcement. "Attention passengers on Transcontinental Airways, Flight 247 to Chicago O'Hare. We will begin boarding in approximately 15 minutes. At this time, we'd like to invite passengers who need special assistance or extra time to board, as well as families traveling with small children, to begin gathering near the priority boarding lane." "That's you," the older woman noted with a smile. "A civilized approach, letting you get settled before the rush." Ananya nodded, beginning to gather her belongings while keeping Leela secure in the carrier. As she organized the diaper bag and her small purse, she noticed the man in the charcoal suit had taken a seat within earshot, still engaged in his increasingly agitated phone conversation. "I don't care how you do it, Martin, just make it happen," he was saying, his voice carrying a sharp edge of impatience. "This account represents 8 figures annually. If we lose it because of technical incompetence, heads will roll, starting with yours." He ended the call with a visible jab at his earpiece, then immediately began another, his tone shifting to something artificially pleasant. "Jennifer, Malcolm Bradford here, just checking in before I land in Chicago. How's everything looking for the presentation?" Ananya focused on her own preparations, checking that Leela's noise-canceling headphones were easily accessible for takeoff. The baby had begun to fuss slightly, perhaps responding to the increasing noise level in the crowded gate area. Ananya gently rocked her while finishing her organization one-handed, a multitasking skill she'd perfected over the past 6 months. "SHH, it's all right, little one," she murmured in a mix of English and Hindi, the blended language she often used when soothing Leela. "We'll be on the plane soon, and then on our way to see Daddy." At the mention of Daddy, spoken in English, Leela's fussing momentarily subsided. She recognized certain words now, and Daddy was among them, thanks to the daily video calls James made sure to have with his daughter despite his hectic schedule and the time difference when he traveled internationally. The gate agent's voice came over the public address system again. "We now invite families with small children and passengers needing extra time to begin boarding Transcontinental Airways, Flight 247 to Chicago O'Hare." Ananya rose, securing the diaper bag over her shoulder and ensuring Leela was comfortable in her carrier. As she made her way toward the priority boarding lane, she passed close to Malcolm Bradford, who was still engaged in his phone conversation, now standing and gathering his own belongings. "Of course the slides are ready," he was saying with evident irritation. "I personally reviewed the final versions yesterday. Just make sure the presentation room is—" He paused, glaring at a passing traveler who had accidentally brushed against his expensive carry-on. "Watch it," he snapped before returning to his call. At the boarding lane, Ananya presented her phone with the digital boarding passes to the gate agent. A different one from Diane at check-in. This one, a younger woman named Abigail according to her name tag. "Thank you, Dr. Harrington," Abigail smiled, scanning the passes. "Boarding with an infant today. You're in seat 4C, I'll seat in first class. Would you like any assistance getting settled on board?" "No, thank you. We should be fine," Ananya replied, appreciating the offer nonetheless. "Very well. Just to let you know, we're expecting a full flight today, so the overhead bins may become limited. If you need any help finding space for your bags, please don't hesitate to ask one of our flight attendants." Ananya thanked her and proceeded down the jetway, joining the small group of pre-boarders. Another family with a toddler, an elderly couple moving carefully with canes, and a woman in a wheelchair being assisted by airport staff. The first-class cabin was empty when she boarded, giving her ample time to settle into her seat without the pressure of other passengers waiting in the aisle. A flight attendant named Michael immediately approached to offer assistance. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Harrington. Can I help you with your diaper bag or anything else while you get comfortable with your little one?" "That would be wonderful, thank you," Ananya replied, allowing him to stow the diaper bag in the overhead compartment while she adjusted Leela's carrier for the seated position. "Would you like a pre-departure beverage? We have water, juice, or if you prefer something stronger, wine or champagne." "Just water for now, please," Ananya requested, knowing hydration was particularly important during air travel, especially while nursing. "Of course, and would you like a blanket for the baby?" "Yes, that would be helpful, thank you." Michael returned promptly with both items, plus an extra pillow. "Just to let you know, we have a changing table in the first-class lavatory. If you need anything at all during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask. We want to make your journey as comfortable as possible." Ananya thanked him for the thoughtful service. As he moved away to prepare for the next passengers, she checked her phone one more time. No new messages from James, which wasn't surprising. He would be in final meetings for the acquisition announcement. The surprise of her arrival in Chicago would remain intact. The first-class cabin began to fill as priority boarding continued. A distinguished-looking older man in a pilot's uniform, likely traveling as a passenger rather than crew, took the seat across the aisle from Ananya. He nodded politely as he stowed his small bag. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Captain Roberts, though not for this flight, just heading back to home base." "Dr. Harrington," Ananya replied with a smile, "and this is Leela." "Ah, a fellow road warrior, though much younger," he chuckled, looking at the baby. "She seems very comfortable with the travel process already." "She's been quite adaptable so far," Ananya agreed. "This is her 4th flight. Starting her early, excellent strategy. I've been flying for 43 years, and I always tell new parents, bring them on board young before they develop any anxiety about it." Their pleasant conversation continued as the boarding process progressed, with Captain Roberts sharing amusing anecdotes from his decades of aviation experience. Leela remained calm throughout, occasionally looking around with wide-eyed curiosity at the new faces and environment. The main cabin boarding was now well underway, with a steady stream of passengers filing past on their way to the economy sections. Malcolm Bradford appeared in the first-class cabin. His earlier phone conversation apparently concluded as he stored his carry-on in the overhead bin and took his seat in the first row. By the time the boarding process was nearing completion, Leela had begun to show signs of restlessness. The excitement and stimulation of the airport, combined with the slight disruption to her usual schedule, had her squirming in the carrier and making small sounds of discomfort. Ananya began her practiced soothing techniques, speaking softly to Leela in their blended English Hindi while gently rocking her as much as the seat allowed. From her diaper bag, retrieved with the help of Michael, she produced a soft elephant teething toy that often helped distract Leela during fussy moments. "There we go, little one," she murmured. "Just a little longer and we'll be in the air. The white noise of the engines will help you sleep." Most nearby passengers seemed understanding of the minor fussing. Certainly Captain Roberts showed no sign of annoyance, instead offering a sympathetic smile. "My granddaughter's about the same age," he commented. "That pre-takeoff restlessness is common. Don't worry, most of us have been there." From the front row, however, Malcolm Bradford twisted around in his seat, casting an irritated glance in their direction before returning his attention to his laptop. The message was clear, though unspoken. The baby's sounds were unwelcome. Ananya continued her efforts to soothe Leela, well aware of the challenges of traveling with an infant, but equally confident in her ability to manage the situation. The baby's fussing remained relatively minor, not yet a cry, just the vocalized discomfort of a child in an overstimulating environment who was perhaps ready for a nap. The final boarding announcement was made, the cabin door was closed, and the standard safety briefing began. As the flight attendants demonstrated the use of oxygen masks and life vests, Leela's fussing incrementally increased, her small sounds becoming more insistent. Ananya checked her diaper, which was still dry, and offered a pacifier, which Leela initially accepted, but then ejected with a dissatisfied noise. The combination of the cabin pressurization beginning, the unfamiliar surroundings, and possibly some teething discomfort were all contributing to her daughter's distress. As the aircraft began to push back from the gate, Leela's fussing transitioned into more distinct crying. Ananya remained calm, continuing her soothing techniques while carefully placing the baby's noise-canceling headphones over her tiny ears to help mitigate the changing pressure and engine noise. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered. "I know it's uncomfortable. It will pass soon." From the front row came an audible sigh of exasperation. Malcolm Bradford had twisted in his seat again, now openly staring at Ananya and Leela with undisguised annoyance. When he caught Ananya's eye, he made no attempt to disguise his displeasure, pointedly looking at the crying baby and then back at Ananya with raised eyebrows. The implied message was clear: do something about that noise. Ananya met his gaze evenly for a moment before returning her full attention to Leela. She had encountered similar attitudes throughout her life, whether as one of the few women of color in elite medical training programs, leading international health initiatives in regions where female authority was questioned, or simply existing in spaces where her presence was seen as somehow intrusive. The man's obvious irritation was familiar territory. The aircraft taxied toward the runway, and Leela's crying intensified with the increasing engine noise despite the headphones. Ananya tried several different positions, eventually finding that holding the baby slightly upright against her shoulder with gentle bouncing motion provided some comfort. Still, the cries continued, not screaming, but the persistent wail of an overtired, uncomfortable infant. "You'd think people would control their children on flights," Bradford's voice carried from the front row, clearly intended to be heard though not directly addressed to Ananya. He had turned to his seatmate, another business traveler, who looked uncomfortable with the comment but offered a noncommittal grunt in response. Captain Roberts across the aisle frowned at Bradford's remark but said nothing, instead offering Ananya an encouraging nod. "Pressure changes," he mouthed silently. "Completely normal." Michael, the flight attendant, paused beside Ananya's seat during his final cabin check. "Is there anything I can get to help with the little one?" he asked discreetly. "No, thank you," Ananya replied. "She'll settle once we're in the air. The pressure changes during takeoff are hard on her ears." "Of course," Michael nodded understandingly. "Don't worry about the noise. Most passengers understand that babies cry sometimes, especially during takeoff and landing." Though spoken quietly, his words carried enough for Bradford to hear, as evidenced by another dramatic sigh from the front row. "Most passengers paid for a quiet, comfortable flight," he muttered, just loudly enough to be heard. The aircraft reached the runway and paused momentarily before the engines revved for takeoff. The acceleration pressed them all back against their seats as the plane gathered speed. Leela's crying briefly intensified with the increased noise and sensation, then, to Ananya's relief, began to subside as the pressure in her little ears equalized. By the time they had reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Leela's cries had diminished to occasional whimpers, her eyelids growing heavy as exhaustion began to overtake her. "There we go," Ananya whispered, gently rubbing her daughter's back. "I knew you'd settle down, my love." The first-class cabin service began, with Michael and another flight attendant preparing the breakfast offerings. The momentary peace was short-lived, however, as Leela, startled by the sound of the service cart, began crying again, this time with renewed vigor. Bradford's patience apparently reached its limit. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood abruptly, and turned to face Ananya's row. His expression was one of barely contained anger as he addressed her directly for the first time. "Excuse me," he said, his tone carrying no actual courtesy despite the polite words. "Some of us are trying to work and prepare for important meetings. Isn't there something you can do to control that noise?" Ananya met his gaze calmly. "I'm doing everything possible to soothe my daughter," she replied, her voice steady despite the confrontational approach. "Babies sometimes cry on planes. It's unfortunate but unavoidable." "Perhaps you should have considered that before bringing an infant on a business flight," Bradford retorted. "Some of us have actual professional responsibilities to manage." The implication that she lacked professional understanding was as familiar as it was incorrect. Ananya continued gently bouncing Leela, who was showing signs of responding to the soothing motion despite the tense exchange. "I understand professional pressures quite well, sir," she replied evenly. "But my daughter has as much right to fly as any other passenger. If the noise is disturbing you, perhaps headphones would help. I believe the flight attendants provide them on request." Bradford's face flushed at her composed response. "The issue isn't my ability to block the noise, but your responsibility to prevent it," he snapped. "Where I come from, parents know how to control their children in public." The racial undertone in his comment was subtle but unmistakable, the implication that Ananya's cultural background somehow correlated with inferior parenting standards. It was an insinuation she had encountered in various forms throughout her life in America, despite her prestigious education and professional accomplishments. Captain Roberts chose this moment to intervene. "That's enough, sir," he said firmly. "The lady is doing everything possible to comfort her child. Your comments are inappropriate and unwelcome." Bradford shot him an affronted look. "I don't recall asking for your input." "Nevertheless, you're receiving it," Roberts replied, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to command. "Please return to your seat and focus on your own concerns." The confrontation had attracted the attention of the cabin crew. Michael approached with professional concern. "Is everything all right here?" "This gentleman seems disturbed by my daughter's crying," Ananya explained calmly, still focused primarily on soothing Leela, who was finally beginning to settle again. "I've explained that I'm doing everything possible to comfort her." "Sir, I'd ask you to return to your seat," Michael addressed Bradford firmly. "If noise is a concern, we can offer noise-canceling headphones." Bradford looked from the flight attendant to Captain Roberts, clearly weighing whether to press the issue further. After a moment of tense silence, he gave a dismissive wave. "Fine, but some people should reconsider their travel choices if they can't manage their responsibilities." With that, he returned to his seat, making a show of putting on his own headphones and returning to his laptop work. The incident left an uncomfortable atmosphere in the first-class cabin, though most passengers seemed to side with Ananya based on their sympathetic glances. Leela, exhausted from her crying episode, finally succumbed to sleep against her mother's chest. "I apologize for that unpleasantness," Captain Roberts said quietly once the situation had calmed. "Some people forget their humanity when they board an aircraft." "Unfortunately, it's not an unfamiliar experience," Ananya replied with a slight smile. "But thank you for your support." The flight continued without further incident for nearly an hour. Leela slept peacefully, and Ananya managed to eat a light breakfast with one hand while keeping her daughter secure against her with the other, a parenting skill she had mastered early in her maternity leave. As they approached the halfway point of the journey to Chicago, Leela began to stir, making the small, stretching movements that typically preceded her waking. Ananya prepared mentally for another potential crying episode, knowing that her daughter might be disoriented upon awakening in the unfamiliar environment. Sure enough, Leela's eyes opened. She looked around with momentary confusion, and then her face crumpled as she began to cry, not the earlier fussing, but the full-throated wail of a disoriented baby. The timing coincided with Bradford standing to visit the lavatory at the front of the cabin. As he passed Ananya's row, he made no effort to hide his disgust at the renewed crying. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "For what we pay for first class, some level of peace should be guaranteed." Ananya ignored him, focusing entirely on Leela. She stood carefully, maintaining the safety strap of the baby carrier, and began the gentle bouncing motion that often helped soothe her daughter. "I think she needs a diaper change," she explained to Michael, who had approached with concern at the renewed crying. "I'll take her to the lavatory." "Of course," Michael nodded. "The one at the front has the changing table. It's occupied at the moment, but should be available shortly." He cast a pointed glance toward the lavatory door, behind which Bradford had disappeared moments before. Ananya continued soothing Leela while waiting, pacing the small area near the galley. The baby's cries had diminished somewhat with the movement, but she was still clearly uncomfortable and likely needed the diaper change to fully settle again. Bradford emerged from the lavatory, his face darkening when he saw Ananya waiting with the still-crying Leela. Instead of simply returning to his seat, he paused directly in front of her. "That noise is completely unacceptable," he stated flatly. "I have important work to complete before landing, and that incessant shrieking makes it impossible to concentrate." "I'm waiting to use the lavatory to change her diaper," Ananya explained evenly. "She'll settle once she's clean and comfortable." "She should have settled an hour ago," Bradford retorted. "There's something wrong with a child that cries continuously, or with the parenting," he added with a pointed look that left little doubt about which he believed was the issue. The confrontation was escalating beyond the earlier tension, with Bradford now standing directly in Ananya's path to the lavatory, his body language increasingly aggressive. Michael had stepped away momentarily to assist another passenger, and Captain Roberts was no longer in direct line of sight from the galley area. "Please excuse me," Ananya said firmly, attempting to step around Bradford to reach the now-vacant lavatory. "My daughter needs changing." Instead of moving aside, Bradford took a half-step to continue blocking her path. "You need to get that child under control," he insisted, his voice rising. "It's selfish and inconsiderate to subject an entire plane to this disruption." Leela, perhaps sensing the tension, began crying with renewed vigor. The combination of her daughter's distress and Bradford's increasingly threatening posture triggered Ananya's protective instincts. Still, she maintained her composure, drawing on years of crisis management experience in high-pressure medical situations. "Sir, you are blocking access to the lavatory," she stated clearly. "Please step aside so I can attend to my daughter's needs." "What your daughter needs is discipline," Bradford snapped, his face flushing with anger. "Where I come from, children are taught proper behavior from infancy." The racist undertone was no longer subtle. The implication that her cultural background resulted in inferior parenting was explicit in both his words and sneering tone. It was a form of prejudice Ananya had encountered throughout her years in America, despite her Harvard medical degree and leadership positions at prestigious institutions. "Your prejudice is showing, sir," she said quietly, shifting Leela to her other shoulder while maintaining direct eye contact with Bradford. "And it's as unimpressive as it is unoriginal." Her calm response seemed to infuriate him further. Perhaps he was unaccustomed to having his implied superiority challenged so directly, especially by the very target of his condescension. "How dare you accuse me of prejudice?" he hissed, leaning closer. "I'm simply stating the obvious. You're unable to control your child, and everyone else is paying the price for your incompetence." Leela's crying reached a new intensity, her little face red with distress. Ananya attempted once more to step around Bradford toward the lavatory, determined to address her daughter's needs despite the confrontation. What happened next occurred so quickly that several witnesses would later provide slightly different accounts. Bradford, apparently pushed beyond some internal boundary by the combination of the baby's intensified crying and Ananya's refusal to accept his intimidation, raised his hand and delivered a sharp slap to Ananya's face, not with full force, but with enough impact to create a shocking sound that cut through the ambient noise of the cabin. The slap was followed by an instant of complete, stunned silence. Even Leela's crying momentarily stopped in startled response to the sudden movement and sound. Then several things happened almost simultaneously. Leela's crying resumed with terrified intensity. Captain Roberts shouted, "Hey!" and lunged from his seat toward the confrontation. Multiple passengers gasped or called out in alarm. Michael and another flight attendant rushed toward the galley area. Ananya, her cheek stinging from the impact, instinctively stepped back while turning slightly to protect Leela from any further aggression. But her eyes, dark and steady, betrayed no fear as she faced her attacker. "You have made a very serious mistake," she said, her accented voice quiet yet carrying in the shocked stillness of the first-class cabin. Bradford stood frozen for a moment, as if surprised by his own action. His raised hand slowly lowered as the gravity of what he had done began to register in his expression. Before anyone else could reach them, Ananya's phone chimed with an incoming text. Without taking her eyes off Bradford, she glanced briefly at the screen visible in her jacket pocket. A message from James. "Just heard from the flight desk that your plane is on schedule. Car will be waiting when you land. Can't wait to see you both. Love you." She looked back at Bradford, her expression shifting from dignified restraint to something approaching pity. "A far more serious mistake than you realize," she added softly. Captain Roberts reached them first, positioning himself between Ananya and Bradford with protective authority. "Sir, you've just committed assault," he stated firmly. "Return to your seat immediately. This incident will be reported to the authorities upon landing." Bradford seemed to be emerging from his momentary shock, his expression transitioning from stunned disbelief at his own actions to defensive anger. "She provoked me," he began, though the excuse sounded hollow even to his own ears, judging by his faltering tone. Michael arrived with another male flight attendant. "What happened?" he demanded, though the redness blooming on Ananya's cheek told much of the story. "This man just physically assaulted this woman and her baby," Captain Roberts stated clearly, ensuring his voice carried to nearby passengers who would serve as witnesses. "I saw it clearly, an unprovoked attack." "She accused me of racism," Bradford protested, grasping for justification. "All I did was ask for some peace and quiet during a flight I paid good money for." "Sir, please return to your seat immediately," Michael directed firmly. "This is a serious situation that will be addressed by the proper authorities." Bradford looked around, suddenly aware that every passenger in the first-class cabin was watching the confrontation with expressions ranging from shock to outright disgust. The full consequences of his impulsive action were beginning to dawn on him. It was just a tap, he attempted to minimize, addressing the gathering flight attendants rather than Ananya directly. Barely made contact, she's completely overreacting. I saw it clearly, Captain Roberts countered. It was a deliberate strike to her face while she was holding an infant. There's no possible justification. The lead flight attendant, who had now joined the group, addressed Ananya with concern. Ma'am, are you and your baby all right? Do you need medical attention? We're physically fine, Ananya assured her, though Leela continued crying, clearly distressed by the confrontation. But I would like to file a formal report about this assault, and I expect this man to be removed from the flight upon landing. Of course, the lead flight attendant nodded. We've already notified the captain, who has alerted ground authorities in Chicago. Law enforcement will meet the aircraft upon arrival. Bradford's face paled noticeably at this information. The professional consequences of an arrest upon landing were clearly calculating behind his eyes. This is ridiculous, he protested, though with less conviction than before. A complete overreaction to a minor incident. Assaulting a woman and her child is not a minor incident, Captain Roberts stated flatly. It's a criminal act that will be treated accordingly. As the confrontation continued, the aircraft's public address system activated. This is Captain Wilson speaking. We've been informed of a disturbance in the first-class cabin. I want to assure all passengers that the situation is under control. However, I must emphasize that any form of violence or threatening behavior on this aircraft will result in immediate consequences, including potential arrest upon landing. We have notified authorities in Chicago who will meet the flight. For now, I ask all passengers to remain in their assigned seats for the remainder of the journey. The captain's announcement brought a new level of seriousness to the situation. Bradford's expression shifted from defensive anger to the first signs of genuine concern about the consequences awaiting him. Sir, return to your seat now, the lead flight attendant directed Bradford. Any further disruption will only compound the seriousness of this incident. Bradford finally complied, walking stiffly back to his seat in the first row, now avoiding eye contact with other passengers whose stares followed his retreat. Michael gently guided Ananya toward the lavatory. Please take all the time you need to care for your daughter, he said kindly. Would you like some ice for your cheek? It's beginning to show a mark. Yes, thank you, Ananya nodded, the professional calm she had maintained during the confrontation beginning to give way to a slight tremor in her hands as the adrenaline of the moment began to subside. Inside the small lavatory with the door securely locked, Ananya finally allowed herself a moment of reaction. Her hands shook slightly as she laid Leela on the changing table, securing her with the safety strap. The baby continued crying, but less intensely now that they were removed from the confrontation. It's all right, my love, Ananya soothed, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You're safe. Mama's got you. As she changed Leela's diaper with practiced efficiency, Ananya examined her daughter carefully for any sign that the confrontation had caused physical harm. Finding none, she felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed by a surge of cold anger at Bradford's actions. In her years of humanitarian medical work, she had encountered hostile situations in conflict zones with less personal danger than she had just experienced on a domestic first-class flight. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Harrington, it's Michael. I have ice for your cheek when you're ready. Just a moment, she called, finishing Leela's diaper change and rearranging her clothing. The baby had finally begun to calm, her cries reduced to occasional hiccuping sobs as the immediate distress passed. When Ananya emerged from the lavatory with a now quieter Leela, she found not only Michael waiting with ice wrapped in a cloth napkin, but also a female flight attendant she hadn't met before. Dr. Harrington, I'm Jessica, the purser for this flight, the woman introduced herself. I want to personally apologize for what you experienced. This is absolutely not representative of transcontinental airways or how we expect our passengers to be treated. Thank you, Ananya replied, accepting the ice pack and holding it gently to her cheek while securing Leela back in her carrier. The baby, exhausted from the emotional episode, was beginning to drift towards sleep against her chest. "We've prepared an incident report that we'd like you to review when you feel ready," Jessica continued. "Law enforcement will meet the aircraft in Chicago, and they'll want a statement from you about what occurred." Ananya nodded, "Of course. In the meantime, is there anything we can do to make you and your daughter more comfortable for the remainder of the flight?" Jessica asked, with genuine concern. "Perhaps a quiet spot to sit away from that man," Ananya suggested, not wanting to return to her assigned seat, which would place her in Bradford's line of sight. "Absolutely. We've prepared a space for you in the crew rest area where you'll have privacy and quiet," Jessica assured her. "Captain Wilson has authorized this exceptional arrangement given the circumstances." The crew rest area, a small compartment normally reserved for flight attendants on longer journeys, provided a welcome sanctuary for the remainder of the flight. Leela finally fell into exhausted sleep, and Ananya had an opportunity to compose herself and consider the situation more fully. She texted James, careful not to alarm him unnecessarily. "Flight going fine, but had a small incident with an unpleasant passenger. Everything is okay now. Leela is sleeping. We'll explain when we land." His response came quickly. "What kind of incident? Are you both all right?" "We're fine," she replied, not wanting to detail the assault via text. "Airline staff have been wonderful. We'll tell you everything in person." As the flight began its descent into Chicago, Jessica returned to escort Ananya back to the main cabin for landing. "We'll have you deplane first," she explained. "Law enforcement officers will be waiting in the jetway to take your statement, if you're comfortable with that." "That's fine," Ananya agreed, "though I'll need to manage Leela simultaneously." "Of course, we'll make the process as smooth as possible." When they returned to the first-class cabin, Ananya was seated in the last row, far from Bradford's position in the front. Captain Roberts, still in his seat across from her original position, gave her a supportive nod as she passed. The landing announcement came from Captain Wilson. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Local time is 10:45 a.m., and weather conditions are clear with a temperature of 72 degrees. All passengers are requested to remain seated upon arrival until further instructions are given. We thank you for your patience and cooperation." The subtle reference to further instructions suggested the captain was preparing passengers for the law enforcement presence that would meet the flight. Ananya secured Leela, still sleeping, in her carrier and fastened her seatbelt for landing. The baby's noise-canceling headphones would help protect her from the pressure changes during descent. As the aircraft touched down and taxied toward the gate, Ananya found herself wondering how this incident would affect the celebration weekend she had planned with James. The acquisition announcement was scheduled for early afternoon. Would this situation create complications for him as CEO during such a critical corporate moment? Her concerns were interrupted by a final announcement from Captain Wilson. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at Gate E4. At this time, we ask that all passengers remain seated. We will be allowing one passenger to deplane first, after which we will proceed with normal deplaning procedures. Thank you for your cooperation and understanding." The aircraft came to its final stop at the gate, and the familiar sounds of the engines powering down filled the cabin. Jessica appeared at Ananya's side. "We're ready whenever you are, Dr. Harrington." Gathering her belongings and ensuring Leela was secure in her carrier, Ananya stood to follow Jessica toward the front of the aircraft. As they passed the first row, Bradford sat rigidly in his seat, staring straight ahead and refusing to make eye contact. The mark on Ananya's cheek was now clearly visible to everyone, a reddened imprint that would likely bruise by evening. The aircraft door opened, and Jessica escorted Ananya into the jetway where, as promised, 2 airport police officers waited. Beyond them, to Ananya's surprise, stood James Harrington, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance, his expression a mixture of concern and controlled anger as he spotted the mark on his wife's face. "Ananya," he called, moving quickly toward them. "What happened? Are you and Leela all right?" Before she could respond, one of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back. We're conducting an investigation into an incident that occurred on the aircraft." "This is my husband," Ananya explained to the officer, "James Harrington." The officer's expression shifted as recognition dawned. "Mr. Harrington, sir, I didn't realize. Of course, you can remain with your wife while we take her statement." James reached them, immediately wrapping an arm protectively around Ananya while being careful not to disturb the sleeping Leela. "What happened?" he repeated, his voice tight with barely contained emotion as he gently touched the mark on her cheek. "A passenger became agitated about Leela crying," Ananya explained calmly, though the slight tremor had returned to her voice now that she was safely with James. "When I tried to take her to the lavatory for a diaper change, he blocked my path and eventually slapped me." James's expression darkened dangerously. "He what?" "Mr. Harrington," the lead officer interjected smoothly, "we understand this is upsetting, but we need to follow proper procedure. The suspect is still on board and will be arresting him momentarily. First, we need a brief statement from your wife about what occurred." With remarkable self-control, James nodded. "Of course, whatever you need." The next 10 minutes proceeded with efficient professionalism, as Ananya provided a concise account of the incident to the officers, who recorded her statement and took photographs of the mark on her face. Captain Roberts also deplaned to provide his witness statement, greeting James with respectful recognition. "Your wife handled herself with remarkable dignity throughout an inexcusable situation, Mr. Harrington," the captain told him. "I've seen a lot in 40 years of flying, but I've rarely witnessed such composed courage in the face of blatant aggression." James thanked him sincerely for his intervention during the incident. As they spoke, Jessica emerged from the aircraft with the lead flight attendant and Captain Wilson, all approaching with expressions of professional concern. "Mr. Harrington," Captain Wilson began formally, "on behalf of the entire crew, I want to express our deepest apologies for the incident involving your wife and daughter. I assure you that Transcontinental Airways does not tolerate any form of violence or discrimination on our aircraft." "I appreciate that, Captain," James replied, his professional demeanor firmly in place despite the personal nature of the situation. "I understand your crew handled the situation appropriately once it occurred." "We've completed all necessary reports," the captain continued. "The passenger in question is currently being detained on board and will be placed under arrest before deplaning." As if on cue, additional police officers entered the jetway, heading toward the aircraft to complete the arrest. Moments later, they emerged escorting Malcolm Bradford, now handcuffed and ashen-faced as the full consequences of his actions became inescapably clear. Bradford's expression shifted from angry defiance to stunned disbelief as he registered James Harrington's presence beside Ananya. The recognition was unmistakable. Most business travelers would instantly recognize the CEO of Transcontinental Airways, whose face appeared in company communications, business publications, and news features about the airline industry. Bradford began, then stopped, the color draining further from his face as understanding crashed over him like a wave. His gaze darted from James to Ananya, the devastating realization dawning that he had not only assaulted a woman and her child, a serious crime in itself, but had specifically attacked the wife of the most powerful man in commercial aviation in the Chicago region. "Mr. Bradford will be processed at the airport police station," the lead officer explained professionally. "Given the nature of the assault and the presence of multiple witnesses, he'll likely face formal charges of battery, with potential enhancements due to the presence of an infant during the incident." As Bradford was led away, still staring back at the Harringtons with horrified recognition, James turned his attention fully to Ananya and Leela. "Let's get you both somewhere quiet," he suggested gently. "The airline has arranged a private lounge space where we can collect ourselves before dealing with anything else." The private lounge area, typically reserved for the airline's most elite customers, offered a welcome sanctuary from the public areas of the busy airport. As soon as they were alone, James carefully embraced Ananya and Leela, mindful of not waking the still sleeping baby. "I can't believe this happened," he said quietly, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "When I got the call from flight operations that there had been an incident involving you, and then saw that mark on your face." "We're all right," Ananya assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Leela was frightened, but she wasn't harmed, and this will heal," she added, touching her cheek lightly. It should never have happened at all, James replied, the CEO's controlled public persona momentarily giving way to the husband and father's protective anger. That man will face every possible consequence, both legal and civil. Ananya nodded, then managed a small smile. This wasn't exactly how I planned our surprise reunion to go. James shook his head, his expression softening. The surprise was wonderful, finding out you were flying in to join the celebration. I just wish. He trailed off, looking at the mark on her cheek again. I know, Ananya acknowledged. But we're here now, and we have the whole weekend ahead of us. Don't let this overshadow your acquisition announcement. The announcement can wait if necessary, James began, but Ananya shook her head. Absolutely not. This is a defining moment for the airline, for you. We'll handle this situation, but it shouldn't derail what you've worked so hard to achieve. Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock at the lounge door. James opened it to find Jessica, the purser from the flight, holding Ananya's checked suitcase that had been expedited from the baggage claim. Dr. Harrington, we've retrieved your luggage as requested, Jessica explained. And the airline's customer service director would like to speak with you both when you feel ready. Thank you, Jessica, James replied. Please let them know we'll be available in about 15 minutes. After Jessica departed, James turned back to Ananya with a more practical concern. The acquisition announcement is scheduled for 1:30 p.m. at headquarters. The car is waiting whenever we're ready, and we have a suite prepared at the peninsula where you can rest and refresh before joining me for the announcement, if you still feel up to it. Of course I do, Ananya assured him firmly. This incident was disturbing, but I won't allow it to disrupt our plans. Once I've given whatever statements the airline and police need, we'll proceed as intended. James smiled with evident admiration for his wife's resilience. The press will be there for the announcement. That mark might still be visible. Let it be visible, Ananya replied with quiet determination. I have nothing to hide or be ashamed of in this situation. If anyone asks, we'll simply state the truth. An unfortunate incident occurred that is being handled appropriately by the authorities. Leela began to stir in her carrier, making the small stretching movements that preceded waking. Ananya gently transferred her to James's waiting arms, his first opportunity to hold his daughter after 3 weeks apart. The baby's eyes opened, focusing on her father's face with immediate recognition. Her tiny features lit up with a gummy smile that momentarily erased the tension of the preceding hours. There's my beautiful girl, James murmured, his entire demeanor softening as he cradled his daughter. Have you been taking good care of Mama for me? The family moment provided a healing interlude before they needed to address the practical aspects of the situation. When the airline's customer service director arrived, accompanied by the company's chief legal counsel, the discussion was brief and practical. The airline would provide full cooperation with the police investigation, preserve all evidence including witness statements and surveillance footage from the aircraft, and ensure the Harringtons were supported in any way needed. Mr. Bradford has already been informed that he is permanently banned from all transcontinental airways flights, effective immediately, the legal counsel explained. We're also coordinating with our partner airlines regarding similar restrictions. By early afternoon, the immediate administrative and legal requirements had been addressed. Ananya and Leela had an opportunity to rest at the hotel before joining James for the acquisition announcement at transcontinental headquarters. As expected, the mark on Ananya's cheek was still visible, though somewhat diminished by the ice treatment and carefully applied makeup. The corporate event proceeded as planned, with James announcing the successful acquisition that would expand Transcontinental's routes across the Pacific Rim. Ananya stood supportively at the edge of the gathering, Leela in her arms, as James delivered his remarks to assembled executives, employees, and media representatives. When he acknowledged his wife and daughter's presence, my unexpected but very welcome surprise guests for this celebration, the audience applauded warmly. A few observant reporters noticed the faint bruise on Ananya's cheek, but the company's communications team had prepared a brief, factual statement about an unfortunate incident aboard her flight that was handled appropriately by crew and law enforcement. The focus remained firmly on the business announcement, with most media representatives respecting the private nature of the earlier events. That evening, as they settled into their hotel suite with Leela peacefully sleeping in the provided crib, James and Ananya finally had an opportunity to discuss the day's events more fully. The arrest is already creating consequences for Bradford beyond the criminal charges, James mentioned, setting aside his tablet where he'd been reviewing news updates. His company issued a statement distancing themselves from his actions and placing him on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Ananya nodded thoughtfully. It's appropriate that there are professional repercussions. What he did reflects a pattern of thinking that has no place in modern society, let alone in business leadership. The most disturbing part, James reflected, joining her on the sofa, is that he clearly felt entitled to behave that way, first the verbal aggression, then escalating to physical assault, all because you didn't conform to his expectations of deference. It's not an unfamiliar experience, Ananya acknowledged, though rarely so blatant or physically aggressive. Throughout my career, I've encountered that same underlying attitude, that subtle surprise or resistance when I don't conform to certain stereotypes or expectations. I know, James replied quietly. I've seen glimpses of it over the years we've been together, the assumptions people make, the different ways you're sometimes treated in professional or social settings, but witnessing the aftermath of such a direct attack. He paused, his hand gently covering hers. It makes me more aware of what you navigate, even in spaces where you should be completely safe. They sat in contemplative silence for a moment before Ananya spoke again. You know what I keep thinking about? When Bradford recognized who you were, that moment in the jetway when he realized exactly whose wife he had assaulted, the absolute horror in his expression. He should be horrified, James stated firmly. He committed assault. Yes, but it wasn't the assault itself that horrified him in that moment, Ananya pointed out. It was the discovery that I wasn't just any woman with a crying baby. I was connected to someone with power, someone who could affect his life and career. That's what terrified him. James considered this. You're suggesting his regret was about the consequences to himself, not about the harmful action. Exactly, Ananya nodded. And that's the more profound problem, isn't it? The idea that the wrongness of an action depends on who the victim is, rather than the nature of the action itself. James was quiet for a moment, absorbing the insight. So if you had been anyone else? If I had been anyone else, he might have faced some consequences, but he probably wouldn't have experienced that particular moment of existential dread. Ananya completed the thought. And that reality reflects the power imbalances that enable such behavior in the first place. The conversation continued late into the evening, extending beyond the specific incident to broader reflections on privilege, accountability, and the subtle prejudices that persisted even in seemingly progressive environments. It was the kind of thoughtful exchange that had characterized their relationship from the beginning, each bringing different perspectives to shared values about justice and human dignity. By Sunday evening, when the Harrington family boarded the transcontinental corporate jet for their return to Boston, the events of Friday morning had been appropriately addressed through legal channels. Bradford faced criminal charges, had been suspended from his executive position pending an internal investigation, and would likely experience lasting professional consequences for his actions. More importantly, the incident, though disturbing, had not overshadowed the purpose of their Chicago weekend. James's acquisition announcement had been well received by shareholders and industry analysts alike. Leela had charmed everyone she encountered at the various corporate functions. And Ananya, despite the initial traumatic experience, had used the situation as an opportunity for meaningful conversations with James and others about the subtle and not-so-subtle biases that continued to shape interactions in modern society. As their private jet lifted into the evening sky above Chicago, Leela slept peacefully in the custom infant seat installed specially for her. Ananya gazed out the window at the receding city lights, reflecting on the unexpected trajectory of what had begun as a simple surprise journey to support her husband's professional milestone. I've been thinking, James said, settling into the seat beside her after confirming with the pilots that their flight path was clear. The foundation we've been discussing, the one to support women in STEM fields and international healthcare initiatives. What about it? Ananya asked, turning from the window with interest. The charitable foundation had been a developing conversation between them for several months, part of their shared commitment to addressing systemic inequities. "I think we should accelerate the timeline," James suggested. "In light of recent events, it seems more relevant than ever to create structural supports for those navigating both subtle and overt barriers." Ananya nodded thoughtfully. "From individual incident to institutional response," she observed, "using a negative experience as catalyst for positive change." "Exactly," James confirmed. "Sometimes it takes a direct encounter with injustice to move from intellectual understanding to committed action." As they continued discussing potential approaches for the foundation, the aircraft cruised smoothly through the night sky toward Boston. Below them stretched the vast American landscape, a complex tapestry of progress and persistence, of lingering prejudices and emerging possibilities. It was a terrain Ananya had learned to navigate with dignity and determination since arriving as a medical student years earlier, and one she and James were now committed to reshaping, in whatever ways their positions and resources allowed, for their daughter's generation. The weekend that had begun with an act of shocking aggression was concluding with renewed purpose, a reminder that while individual incidents of prejudice remained an unfortunate reality, the responses to such incidents could stretch far beyond the immediate circumstances, creating ripples of positive change that extended into the future. The Peninsula Hotel ballroom gradually emptied as the Transcontinental Airways acquisition celebration wound down. Executives and board members offered final congratulations to James Harrington on the landmark deal before departing for late flights or weekend plans. Through it all, Ananya had stood graciously at her husband's side, Leela sleeping peacefully against her shoulder, the faint mark on her cheek a subtle reminder of the morning's traumatic incident. As the last guests departed, leaving only the Harringtons and a few key staff members, the company's longtime board chairman approached them with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said quietly to Ananya, "I've known James for over 15 years, watched him build this airline into what it is today." He gestured toward the CEO, who was engaged in conversation with his executive team across the room. "But in all those years, I've never seen him as focused, as absolutely unwavering, as he was today when dealing with both the incident involving you and this major acquisition simultaneously." He smiled with genuine admiration. "Most people would have crumbled under that combination of personal crisis and professional pressure. He didn't miss a beat on either front." Ananya nodded in acknowledgement, gently adjusting Leela's position against her shoulder. "That's who he is," she replied simply. The chairman studied her for a moment. "And I suspect that's also who you are, Dr. Harrington, the way you've handled today, with such dignity and composure after what must have been a terrifying experience." He shook his head slightly. "It's remarkable." Ananya's expression remained thoughtful. "When you spent time in refugee camps administering vaccines during conflict or coordinated emergency medical responses after natural disasters," she said quietly, "you develop a certain perspective on what constitutes a genuine crisis versus a temporary difficulty." She glanced toward James, who caught her eye across the room and smiled. "Besides," she added, "showing that man that his actions couldn't diminish me, couldn't stop me from being precisely where I meant to be today. That was its own form of justice, wouldn't you say?" The chairman nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning in his eyes about exactly what kind of partnership stood at the helm of Transcontinental's future. "Indeed it was, Doctor," he agreed. "Indeed it was."